The knock on our door came louder than any knock we had heard before. My husband Daniel opened it to find Brenda Voss standing there with her clipboard. She was 7 months pregnant and somehow that made her feel entitled to everything. Brenda ran the Cypress Grove Homeowners Association like it was her personal kingdom. We had moved in only 3 weeks earlier, hoping for a quiet fresh start. Daniel was a disabled veteran who finally found a house with a wheelchair ramp. That ramp was the very thing Brenda hated the most. She said our backyard pool view was wasted on people like us. I felt my stomach twist as she spoke those words without any shame. Brenda explained that her own house lacked a pool due to zoning restrictions. She wanted us to swap homes immediately so she could enjoy our pool. I laughed nervously, certain this had to be some strange neighborhood joke. Her face stayed completely serious, eyes narrowed with cold determined entitlement. She slapped a fresh violation notice against our doorframe without even blinking once. The notice claimed our ramp violated some obscure aesthetic guideline she invented. Daniel's hands tightened around his cane as old anger started rising inside him. He had served 2 tours overseas and built that ramp with his own hands. Now a stranger wanted to take our home because of a swimming pool. I stepped forward, asking calmly what right she had to demand this trade. Brenda smiled coldly and said HOA presidents have more power than people realize. She mentioned fines, liens she enjoyed wielding. Our neighbor Marisol watched from her porch, phone already recording everything happening. Marisol had warned us during our first week that Brenda targeted new families. She said 3 previous families had been pushed out under similar manufactured complaints. My heart pounded as I realized this was not an isolated incident at all. Brenda crossed her arms over her belly and stared at our ramp with disgust. She called it an eyesore that lowered property values for everyone on the street. Daniel reminded her gently that ramps were protected under federal disability housing law. Brenda waved her hand dismissively, claiming HOA bylaws overruled any outside regulations entirely. I knew that was false, but exhaustion made arguing feel pointless in that moment. She gave us 48 hours to agree or face daily mounting fines. The number she quoted made my breath catch somewhere deep in my throat. $500 a day was more than we could survive for long. Marisol stepped off her porch and asked Brenda to leave us alone immediately. Brenda spun around and accused Marisol of interfering with official HOA business matters. The tension between them crackled like electricity before a sudden summer storm. I noticed several neighbors peeking through blinds, afraid to step outside and intervene. Brenda's husband sat silently in their car, scrolling his phone without any reaction. He never looked up often. Daniel pulled me gently inside before things escalated further on our front lawn. We closed the door, but the silence inside felt heavier than the shouting outside. I slid down against the wall, feeling tears burn behind my tired eyes. Daniel knelt beside me, his cane tapping softly against the hardwood floor. He whispered that we would not lose this house without putting up a fight. I nodded, chest like an invisible tightening fist. Outside, as she marched toward her oversized waiting SUV. Through the window, for her growing file. Something told me this was only the opening move of a much longer war. That night, a document across our small kitchen table. He searched line by line for any clause that justified Brenda's outrageous demand. Nothing in the bylaws mentioned forcing residents to trade homes for pool access. Marisol texted us, offering to share her own files from previous Brenda conflicts. She had screenshots, emails, 2 entire years. One file showed Brenda fining a disabled veteran for a similar ramp violation. Another showed her targeting an immigrant family over supposedly unapproved exterior paint colors. My hands trembled as I scrolled through pattern after disturbing discriminatory pattern. Daniel said quietly that patterns like this could be used against her legally. We decided to document everything. Every notice. Every uncomfortable interaction. The next morning. This time taped directly to our mailbox. It claimed our garden gnomes violated some newly invented decorative item restriction. I almost laughed until I noticed the threatening tone buried inside the wording. Brenda was building a case. Brick by brick. Marisol invited several other affected neighbors to meet quietly at her house that evening. 6 families showed up, each carrying their own folder of HOA grievances. A young couple shared how Brenda fined them for hanging a religious wreath. An elderly man described losing his accessible parking spot to Brenda's personal guests. Everyone agreed that Brenda's power had grown far beyond what any bylaws allowed. Someone suggested contacting a fair housing attorney who handled discrimination cases locally. Daniel called the next morning. His voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on him. The attorney listened carefully. Then said our case sounded disturbingly strong and documented. She explained that targeting a veteran's ramp could violate federal accessibility protections directly. She also mentioned that HOA boards could be sued for selective discriminatory enforcement. Hope flickered inside me for the first time since Brenda's first knock. We scheduled a meeting with the attorney, bringing every neighbor's collected evidence along. Meanwhile, hiring a contractor to measure our property line. She claimed our fence encroached slightly onto what she called community common area. Daniel calmly recorded the contractor measuring, noting timestamps for our growing case file. That evening, demanding immediate compliance within 24 hours. She threatened a forced lien sale if we refused her ridiculous house trade demand. I felt anger replace fear as I read her words for the 3rd time. Daniel squeezed my hand and said her arrogance would soon become her downfall. We printed every document, organized every timestamp, and prepared for the upcoming hearing. Marisol arranged for a local reporter to attend. Curious about the unfolding HOA scandal, word spread quickly through the neighborhood group chat about Brenda's escalating abusive behavior. Several residents who once stayed silent finally agreed to speak up publicly now. The morning of the hearing arrived bright, tense, anticipation. Daniel wore his old uniform jacket, medals pinned carefully above his steady heartbeat. I held his hand as we walked toward the community clubhouse together. Unshaken, Brenda stood near the entrance, smiling confidently like victory already belonged to her. She had no idea how much evidence we carried inside that single folder. The board members took their seats, unaware their meeting was about to change everything. Brenda opened the meeting demanding immediate approval for our forced house trade proposal. The board members shifted uncomfortably, sensing something unusual in the tense crowded room. Our attorney stood, calmly presenting documented patterns of discrimination spanning multiple affected families. She showed fines targeting veterans, immigrants, recent years. Gasps rippled through the room as neighbors recognized their own forgotten grievances exposed. Marisol played her recordings, capturing Brenda's threats in chilling, unmistakable clarity. Brenda's face shifted from confidence to visible panic within mere seconds. She tried interrupting, claiming everything was simply standard enforcement of community guidelines. The attorney calmly presented federal housing law protecting disabled veterans like Daniel. She explained that targeting his ramp violated clear, well-established legal protections. One board member admitted Brenda often bypassed votes, acting entirely on her own authority. Another revealed Brenda used HOA funds for personal landscaping disguised as community projects. The reporter quietly took notes, recording every damaging revelation unfolding before everyone present. Brenda's husband buried his face in his hands with embarrassment. The board called for an emergency vote to suspend Brenda's presidency immediately. Hands rose quickly, almost unanimously, sealing her sudden and humiliating downfall. Brenda shouted that this was unfair, that she only wanted what was deserved. Nobody in the room offered her sympathy after years of unchecked cruelty. Police arrived minutes later, responding to the attorney's earlier filed harassment report. An officer read Brenda her rights for trespassing onto our property unlawfully twice. Her contractor's measurement visit, it turned out, entirely. Brenda's hands shook as the officer guided her gently toward the waiting patrol car. Neighbors watched silently, some recording. As her reign finally crumbled completely apart, Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of weeks finally lifting from his tired shoulders. I squeezed his hand, tears now falling freely down my grateful face. The board apologized publicly, promising immediate review of every fine Brenda issued. Our ramp violation was dismissed instantly, along with every fabricated notice against us. Marisol hugged me tightly, whispering that justice had finally arrived for everyone. The other affected families began discussing potential lawsuits against the negligent former board. Weeks later, charge, promising fairness and genuine transparency. Our street felt lighter, as if a long shadow had finally been lifted. Daniel installed a small plaque beside our ramp honoring resilience and quiet courage. Children played freely near our pool, laughter replacing the tension of past months. Brenda's house sat quiet, her absence a constant reminder of consequences earned. We learned later she faced additional charges for years of documented harassment patterns. Her power collapsed the moment people found their collective voice. Our story spread through the neighborhood as proof that standing together truly mattered. Daniel often said courage was not about winning every single battle alone. It was about refusing to disappear quietly when faced with unjust abusive power. I watched him swim with our daughter months later, finally born into safety. The pool that started this conflict became a symbol of hard-fought peace. Justice often arrives slowly, but it arrives for those who fight. Standing together had transformed fear into strength, and strangers into lasting friends. Our home finally felt like the safe place we always deserved.